I never expected my friend's mom to look at me that way, and when she finally whispered, "You don't even realize what you do to me," everything changed. I still remember the first time I really noticed her. Not just as my friend's mom, but as someone who carried herself with a kind of quiet grace that caught me off guard. That evening, I had come over to spend the weekend at my friend's house. He was the kind of guy you could never be bored with, always planning something, always moving. But the moment his mom opened the door, I felt a pause. Like the air had shifted, if only slightly. She stood there with a welcoming smile, the kind that felt both practiced and genuine at once. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands falling in a way that made her look softer than the last time I'd seen her. She had this presence, confident, steady, but there was something in her eyes that lingered when they met mine. "Come in, it's good to see you again," she said warmly. Her hand brushed against my arm as I stepped through the doorway, a casual gesture, but I felt it far too clearly. Her touch was light, the kind you're not supposed to notice, but it stayed with me even after she moved on. The house smelled faintly of something simmering in the kitchen, garlic, rosemary, maybe onions. That comforting, homely scent wrapped around me as we walked inside. I told myself I was just tired, maybe imagining the way she glanced at me longer than necessary. But part of me wondered if it really was my imagination at all. Later, when we sat down in the living room before dinner, she asked me questions most adults never did. Not just, "How's school?" or "What are you studying?" but things that went deeper. "What is it you really want to do? I mean, outside of expectations. Just, you." Her voice carried genuine curiosity, not the polite tone people often use with younger men. She actually wanted to know. I stumbled through an answer, something about chasing the things that made me feel alive. She smiled at that, really smiled, and for a moment, her gaze softened, almost proud, almost wistful. My friend came in then, joking about something, and the moment broke. But I kept replaying it in my mind. The way she leaned slightly closer when I spoke. The way her fingers rested lightly on my shoulder as she laughed at his joke, even though I hadn't said anything funny. Her perfume was subtle, but every time she moved, I caught it again, jasmine or something close. It wasn't overpowering. It was the kind of scent that makes you want to lean closer, just to know it better. And though nothing out of place happened that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was in the way she looked at me, the softness of her hand on my shoulder, the weight of her attention. Little things. Small enough to ignore. But not small enough to forget. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, her voice echoed in my head, gentle but firm, "It's good to see you again." Somehow, it felt like she had meant more than just words. The next afternoon, something small but meaningful happened. My friend had stepped out to grab a few things, leaving me alone in the house with her. At first, I didn't think much of it, I figured I'd scroll on my phone or wait until he came back. But then she appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a pot of tea, and asked softly, "Would you like a cup?" Her voice carried a calm steadiness, like she wasn't in a hurry for anything. I nodded, and before I knew it, I was sitting at the kitchen table across from her, a steaming cup of tea warming my hands. The kitchen felt different without my friend's energy bouncing around. It was quiet, the kind of silence you don't want to fill too quickly. The late afternoon sunlight spilled in through the blinds, cutting across the table in golden stripes, dust motes drifting lazily through the air. At first, we spoke about simple things, school, the weather, what I planned to do after finishing my degree. But there was something about the way she listened that made even the simplest answers feel like they mattered. She leaned forward slightly, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes fixed on me as though I were saying something far more important than I really was. Most people ask questions out of politeness. She asked them out of genuine interest. And that difference, subtle as it was, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. I tried to return the curiosity, asking her if she'd always wanted to live here, in this house. She laughed softly, almost to herself, and shook her head. "No," she said. "When I was younger, I thought I'd travel. Live in cities that never sleep. I thought my life would be bigger, somehow. Her fingers traced absent circles along the rim of her teacup as she spoke, her voice tinged with a quiet longing. But life has a way of redirecting you. I didn't know what to say at first. She wasn't sad exactly, but there was a vulnerability in her tone that caught me off guard. So I told her the only honest thing I could think of, that she still seemed like someone who carried a world inside her, even if she stayed in one place. For a moment, her eyes softened, and the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. It wasn't the kind of smile you give to anyone who flatters you. It was the kind that slips out when someone says something that touches deeper than expected. The silence stretched between us then, not uncomfortable but thick with something unspoken. The sound of the kettle clicking off in the background seemed louder than it should have. She broke it gently, saying, "You have an old soul." "Do people tell you that?" I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond, but the warmth in her gaze steadied me. It was strange, sitting there, I felt less like a guest in her house and more like someone she had chosen to let in. And though the moment passed as my friend returned soon after, the memory of that sunlight-filled kitchen lingered. Her words, her gaze, the quiet intimacy of being truly listened to, it stayed with me, quietly unsettling in the best possible way. Dinner that evening felt different than any other weekend I'd spent at my friend's house. There was a rhythm to it, the clatter of plates, the scent of roasting vegetables, the soft hum of music coming from the living room, but beneath it, there was something quieter, more charged, that I couldn't quite name. She suggested we prepare the meal together. At first, it was practical, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, moving around the kitchen, but little moments began to accumulate, subtle and unspoken, until I noticed them. Our hands brushed while passing ingredients, a fleeting touch that lingered just a heartbeat too long. Each time it happened, my chest seemed to tighten slightly, and I caught myself hoping it wouldn't end. It wasn't intentional, at least, that's what I told myself, yet the warmth of her skin against mine sent a strange, unfamiliar thrill through me. At one point, I reached for a knife to slice a tomato, and her hand was there, steadying it. "Here, let me," she said softly. Her fingers brushed mine again, sliding along mine in a motion so casual, yet it left a tingling trace behind. I looked up, and she was smiling, calm and unbothered, but her eyes, they held something I couldn't name. Recognition? Approval? Or perhaps something more. Later, she noticed my collar was slightly crooked. Without thinking, she reached over and adjusted it. Her fingers grazed my neck in the process, a touch so light it could have been accidental, and yet, my pulse jumped, and I felt a warmth crawl up my spine. I caught her glance, but she didn't flinch. It was fleeting, but it left me aware of every movement she made after that. Even the mundane acts of cooking carried weight. She would taste a sauce and brush her fingers against mine when handing the spoon back. She'd lean slightly closer over the counter to read a recipe, her hair brushing against my shoulder. Each small contact was innocent in context, yet charged with something neither of us acknowledged aloud. The air smelled of garlic and olive oil, but mixed with it was the subtle scent she always wore, a soft, floral fragrance that seemed to linger closer when we were near each other. It wrapped around me in a way that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, though the rest of the house was bustling with the familiar noises of a home lived in. And yet, amidst it all, there was restraint. Neither of us acted on the tension that hummed in the space between us. We laughed lightly at minor mistakes, exchanged fleeting glances, and allowed our hands to meet just often enough to notice the electricity, never enough to cross the invisible line. By the time we set the table and poured drinks, I was acutely aware of her presence. Every gesture, every smile, every subtle touch carried a weight I couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. It was in these small, unspoken things that I first realized how different this weekend felt, and that maybe, in ways I hadn't yet allowed myself to admit, I was seeing her in a way I never had before. Later that evening, the house had quieted down. My friend had gone out to meet a few friends, leaving the two of us alone in the living room. The evening light had faded into a soft amber glow from the lamps, casting long shadows across the furniture. The quiet was heavy, intimate, and I realized I was acutely aware of every small sound, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of the curtains, the subtle creak of the floor beneath her feet as she moved closer to the armchair where I sat. We didn't speak immediately. I wasn't sure who would break the silence first. She poured herself a glass of water and offered me one, her fingers brushing mine as she handed it over. My pulse fluttered at the brief contact, and I wondered if she felt it too. Then, almost without warning, she spoke, her voice low and unusually hesitant. "Sometimes I feel invisible," she said, eyes fixed on the window rather than me. "Like people forget that I'm more than just a mom, a host, someone who's supposed to always have it together." I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to offer the usual polite reassurances. "You're not invisible," I said sincerely. "I see you. I think you deserve to be seen, really seen, more than anyone knows." Her head lifted slowly, and for a moment, she looked at me fully. There was a pause, a hesitation, as if she were measuring whether speaking would change everything or nothing. Then her lips curved into a faint, almost shy smile, and she whispered words that made my chest tighten, "You don't even realize what you do to me." The room seemed to shrink around us. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close we were, how small gestures now carried weight I hadn't noticed before. She reached out, resting her hand over mine on the arm of the chair. Her thumb brushed along the back of my hand, slow and deliberate, and I felt the warmth of her skin seep through the fabric of my sleeve. I wanted to say something, to acknowledge the tension, but no words came. Instead, I simply let my hand remain under hers, feeling the quiet steadiness of her touch. It was intimate in a way that startled me, familiar, yet forbidden. The way she lingered there, looking at me with soft vulnerability, made the air between us hum with a silent energy neither of us named aloud. Time seemed to stretch. The faint tick of the wall clock, the distant sounds from the street outside, even the gentle hiss of the radiator, all of it faded into the background. What remained was the quiet honesty in her eyes and the gentle pressure of her hand over mine. Finally, she pulled back slightly, as if realizing the moment had gone far enough. But the unspoken connection lingered, more palpable than words could convey. I realized then that this wasn't just a fleeting warmth or idle curiosity, there was something deeper, a subtle pull between us that neither of us had dared to acknowledge until now. That night, as I walked back to my room, her words echoed in my mind, warm and heavy, "You don't even realize what you do to me." I lay awake for hours, the memory of her gaze, her hand, her voice, replaying in quiet loops. Something had shifted, and there was no going back to the simplicity of before. That night, the house had grown quiet again. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving the two of us lingering in the living room, the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the floorboards the only sounds breaking the silence. The faint glow of the lamp on the side table cast gentle shadows across her face, highlighting the subtle lines that traced her life's experiences, graceful, mature, and quietly beautiful. We ended up sitting on the couch together, side by side, without planning it. The air between us felt heavier, charged with a tension neither of us wanted to name. She shifted slightly, and her shoulder brushed mine. It was such a small motion, yet the warmth that spread through me was immediate, undeniable. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. We talked, or perhaps we simply existed together, exchanging fleeting glances rather than words. There was a rhythm in our silence, a subtle awareness of each other's presence. Her hair fell forward, brushing the side of my cheek as she leaned to adjust a cushion, and I caught my breath at the intimacy of the moment. I could feel the steady warmth of her body radiating through the soft fabric of her sweater, a quiet heat that made the world outside the couch disappear. Every gesture carried meaning without being spoken. When she laughed softly at something I said, her hand moved to rest lightly on the couch near mine. The proximity alone made my heart race. I was hyper-aware of the small touches, the brief brush of her fingers as she reached for her water glass, the subtle shift of her knee against mine when she adjusted her position. These moments were fleeting, delicate, and intoxicating. She didn't speak about what was happening between us, and neither did I. There was no need. The silence, the small touches, the way our bodies naturally gravitated toward one another, said everything words might have ruined. I felt both elated and guilty, acutely conscious of the line we were approaching, a line we had yet to cross, but whose presence made every subtle motion charged with meaning. At one point, she leaned back slightly, resting her head against the couch cushions. Her hair grazed my shoulder again, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I dared a glance at her face, and she was watching me with a softness in her eyes that spoke volumes. There was longing there, curiosity, hesitation, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection we had stumbled into. It was a night of small, fleeting moments, the way her fingers lingered near mine, the warmth of her shoulder against mine, the way our eyes met and held each other just a beat longer than usual. We were treading a delicate line, aware of the rules and consequences, yet unable to ignore the pull that drew us closer. By the time the evening ended, nothing had been confessed, nothing had changed in words. And yet, everything had changed. The air between us was heavier with possibility, a quiet acknowledgement that what existed here was far from ordinary. And in that charged silence, I realized that this connection, subtle and unspoken, would linger long after the night ended. The following day, everything felt different, though outwardly nothing had changed. My friend was around again, joking, teasing, and filling the house with the same easy energy as always. But between her and me, there was an unspoken shift, a subtle awareness that had altered the rhythm of our interactions. She moved with a quiet deliberateness, avoiding prolonged proximity when possible. I noticed how she would pause before entering the kitchen if I was already there, how her hand lingered on the doorknob a beat longer than necessary, almost as if she were steadying herself against her own impulses. Every glance she gave me was careful, measured, yet carried a warmth and recognition that didn't escape me. I caught myself watching her too. The way her hair caught the sunlight streaming through the window, the gentle curve of her smile when she thought I wasn't looking, the subtle way she adjusted her posture when I entered the room. I wanted to bridge the distance, to recreate the closeness from the night before, but I held back. We both knew we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't fully acknowledge, the kind of tension that could unravel the delicate balance of everyday life. At dinner, our interactions were more careful. She poured my water with a professional politeness, but our hands brushed briefly as she handed the glass to me. I felt the warmth from that fleeting contact linger longer than usual. Across the table, our eyes met, and I could see the quiet hesitation in hers, mirrored in my own. It was a delicate dance of avoidance and longing, each of us aware that even the smallest misstep could reveal too much. Later, when my friend stepped outside to take a call, we shared a brief moment in the kitchen alone. She leaned slightly against the counter, her eyes catching mine, her lips curving in a small, knowing smile. I could feel the weight of the unspoken words pressing between us, the confession she had made, the intensity of the connection, and the temptation to reach out, even though we both knew it would be reckless. When she moved to clear the dishes, her hand brushed mine just enough for me to feel it, an almost imperceptible apology or acknowledgement of the tension that neither of us named. It was enough to remind me that the connection from the night before had not disappeared. Every glance, every subtle gesture, carried the weight of what could happen, and the restraint we both exercised made it even more electric. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, though not physically. It was a different kind of fatigue, the kind that comes from walking the edge of desire, of knowing what you feel and yet keeping it tethered for the sake of everything around you. I realized then that our hesitation, our careful awareness of boundaries, was not just caution, it was part of what made the connection so intense. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I replayed her glances, her brief touches, the way her eyes lingered on me even when she turned away. Hesitation had become a language between us, one that was subtle but unmistakable. And though it frustrated and tempted me in equal measure, it also deepened the unspoken bond we shared, making the eventual resolution all the more poignant. The weekend drew to a close faster than I wanted it to. My bag was packed, my friend chatting casually about plans for the week ahead, and I felt a quiet tension in my chest that made saying goodbye feel heavier than usual. The house, so familiar over the past few days, now seemed infused with the memory of every subtle touch, every lingering glance, every quiet conversation. Before I could leave, she appeared in the doorway, holding her coat, a soft smile playing on her lips. There was a pause, that delicate, unspoken moment we had grown accustomed to over the weekend. She didn't rush in with words, didn't speak before I could react. Instead, she simply stood there, and in her presence, the rest of the house seemed to fade away. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice low and warm, almost hesitant. "For everything. For listening. For noticing me." I wanted to tell her that I had felt the same way, that her words, her touch, and even the simple way she moved through the house had left an impression I wouldn't forget. But instead, I let my hand reach for hers, the gesture natural, almost instinctive. Her fingers intertwined with mine, her thumb brushing over the back of my hand. I could feel the subtle warmth of her skin, the steadiness of her grip, the quiet pulse beneath her touch. In that moment, words were unnecessary, our hands spoke for us, conveying gratitude, longing, and acknowledgement all at once. We lingered there, a moment stretched in time. Her eyes held mine with a softness that made my chest tighten, and I realized how much the past few days had changed the way I saw her, not as my friend's mom, not as an adult I was meant to respect from a distance, but as a woman who had allowed herself to be seen, and who had, in turn, made me feel alive in ways I hadn't anticipated. She withdrew her hand gently, resting it briefly against my forearm before letting go entirely. There was no rush, no sudden movement to break the connection, the lingering touch said everything that needed to be said. "Take care," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of sincerity and quiet longing. I nodded, my throat tight, words failing me. I watched her as I stepped toward the door, every detail of her, the curve of her smile, the warmth of her eyes, the graceful way she carried herself, etched into my memory. Before I left, she gave me one final glance, a look that said she understood the complexity of what we shared, yet also accepted the boundaries that life demanded. And in that look, there was comfort, reassurance, and a gentle promise. What we had discovered over the weekend was real, and it mattered, even if it could not be fully acted upon. As I walked away, I carried with me a warmth that stayed long after the house disappeared behind me. The weekend had been more than a visit, it had been a revelation, a quiet awakening to a connection that was tender, electric, and profoundly human. And though it ended with a goodbye, the memory lingered, soft, steady, and utterly unforgettable. If this story made your heart race or reminded you of a secret connection you felt, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear if you've ever experienced a quiet, unspoken bond like this one.